Welcome, everyone, to Bustin' Free from the Seven Deadly Bees. We're going to talk about strategies to balance blood sugar, blood pressure, budget, the blues, the belly fat, the brain fog, the burnout. And I know some of you are probably saying to yourself, okay, Michelle must be cray cray, because how can all of these things actually be connected? But before we go any further, I would love to hear from you. What are you here for? And that way I can tailor my presentation to your needs. Are you here because of the blues, meaning, dealing with mood issues, anxiety, depression, things of that nature? Are you talking about belly fat? Are you talking about excess weight? Are you concerned with blood pressure? Are you concerned with blood glucose issues? Are you concerned with burnout? Are you concerned with digestive issues? Let me know in the chat. Why are you here? And I want you to start to think about the flip side of that. I know a lot of times we focus on the negatives. Well, it's the blood pressure, Michelle. It's the blood glucose, Michelle. But I want us to reframe it and instead think about what is it that we really, really want to address here. And if you're like me, you're tired of just talking about the problem and you're really interested in finding the solutions. You want to find out, how can we improve our energy? How can we create that body that we're proud of? How can we clear our mind? How can we access the more balancing emotions? How can we tap into a way of approaching health that is budget friendly, right? So let's see. I see a lot of people here. We're talking about weight issues. Let's see, what else do we have? Tapping into the chat here. Yep. So we have cortisol imbalances, weight issues, anything else? Burnout, digestive issues. Okay. So we're going to be talking about all of those things, thankfully. All righty. Now, interestingly enough, in our country today, I was shocked when I heard this particular statistic that 93% of our population is what we refer to as metabolically unwell. So they may have one or more of the following conditions: either a waist circumference of more than 40 inches for men and more than 34 inches for women, or they have a fasting blood glucose that is greater than 100, or their hemoglobin A1C is greater than 5.7, or another factor, another metabolic marker that many people are not looking at is fasting insulin. And when you have a fasting insulin that is greater than 5, that is a significant issue. But most times people are not looking at that particular marker, which is very critical. Now, all of these things in reality revolve around the biggest B of them all, which is blood glucose. Blood glucose is one of the most underappreciated marker that can really give you an indication of future risk factors, future medical crises, if not addressed. So when you think about diabetes, when you think about your blood glucose levels, I want you to think about it not just in terms of sugar in your blood, but think about it in terms of stroke, in terms of heart attack, in terms of glaucoma, in terms of cataracts, in terms of Alzheimer's, in terms of blood pressure, in terms of peripheral neuropathy, in terms of mood disorders, in terms of belly fat. All of these things are actually correlated to the big B of blood glucose. So what we're going to be covering today are some of the most common underlying causes of the big deadly Bs. That includes belly fat, brain fog, blood pressure, the blues, the burnout, and ultimately, all of these things will impact the other big B called our budget. And what we're also going to talk about are 5 budget-friendly strategies to reverse the underlying causes of the deadly Bs. melt your midline, sharpen your focus, recharge your energy. And we talk about doing this in terms of a 30-day reset and then a 90-day reset. And when I say a 30-day reset, meaning that you're going to start to see changes within 30 days, but it really takes about 90 days to get things to set in place. And then in order to make it into a true lifestyle, you need to apply these things consistently for about 6 to 9 months so that it becomes part of your DNA, both literally and figuratively. A lot of times people will make changes for a couple of weeks, maybe even a couple of months, but they haven't really embraced those changes as part of who they are, as part of their new identity. And so what happens is they see the wonderful outcomes, they enjoy those wonderful outcomes for a couple of months, and then they slowly start to backslide. And Lord knows we are all guilty, all of us, including myself, of backsliding. And that's why it's important to be in a community, to be in connection with other people, to hopefully convert maybe some people in your community, some people in your family, to join this train of transforming your life and your lifestyle to make it something that will be sustainable. Now, first, a little bit about me in terms of who I am and why I care so much about things like belly fat and blood glucose and blood pressure and brain fog and the blues and burnout and people's budgets. Well, to give you a little bit of backstory, many years ago, I adopted a little girl. And before I adopted her, the reason why she had come into my care as a foster parent initially was because she was experiencing a lot of different issues. Everything from diabetes to being extremely overweight, to a lot of mental issues, to hormonal imbalances, behavioral issues, practically everything you can think of, this poor little girl was dealing with, in addition to the fact that she only had one kidney. So everything was compounded by the fact that she only had one organ left to filter a lot of the toxicity that she was being dealt with. And of course, being in the foster system, that added another layer of significant stress and trauma. Now, 2 years after adoption, you see that there was a significant difference, not only in terms of how she looked, but in terms of her actual metabolic health. She was transformed in terms of her blood glucose levels, her insulin levels, her A1C levels, obviously her weight, and even mentally and emotionally. At this stage, 2 years after I adopted her, she was on no medications. Prior to the adoption, she was on several medications, from insulin to metformin to several psychiatric medications. You name it, this poor girl was dealing with these things. And so when I adopted this little girl, this is when I really became obsessed with metabolic health. You know, prior to this, I was dealing more so with more chronic issues kind of thing in terms of like just blood pressure types of stuff. But when I was interacting with this little girl, I came to understand the importance of blood glucose and how it tapped into and affected practically every single system that you can think of, from your hormonal system to your immune system, to your adrenal system, to your digestive system, to your mental, emotional state. Everything is affected by your blood glucose level and your blood glucose regulation. So now this big B becomes one of the major causes of several of the other Bs, but we still need to go back underneath and find out, why is the blood glucose level being dysregulated? What is the root causal factor for this primary imbalance? Today, we're going to talk about different types of blood sugar imbalances. We're also going to talk about insulin resistance, the silent killer, and the causes of insulin resistance. We're going to talk about blood pressure imbalances, cardiovascular disease, how it's connected to blood glucose imbalances. We're also going to talk about the symptoms of blood sugar imbalances, because a lot of people have blood sugar imbalances and don't even know it. We're also going to talk about blood sugar imbalance in terms of the spectrum, because you don't just wake up being diabetic. Okay? For most people, diabetes is a progression not only of years, but sometimes over decades. And a lot of the primary warning flags that should be adhered to, most practitioners are not looking at. And most people are completely unaware of what those symptoms are. So that's why we're going to go through that. And we're going to talk about how the blood sugar imbalances keep your belly fat, keep your brain foggy, and exhaust you in terms of your ability to have a phenomenal career and to enjoy life in general. And when you have a mastery of this information, that is when you'll be able to take back control from the 7 deadly Bs. So let's first talk about, what does normal blood sugar look like? Well, first you eat. After you eat, your blood glucose rises. Now, this is one of the first areas of imbalance, because it's okay for the blood glucose to rise, say, 10 or 20, maybe 30 points. But some people, their blood sugar rises extraordinarily. So, for instance, they may start out having a blood sugar level of, let's say, 90 before they eat. And then after they eat a certain food, the blood sugar may jump all the way up to 140. That is not good. There are several reasons why that is happening, and we're going to talk about that. Now, after the blood glucose level rises, the pancreas says, okay, guys, it's time to send out the troops, otherwise known as insulin. That insulin then takes the blood glucose out of the bloodstream and into the cell. And then once that happens, the blood glucose levels decrease. And then after several hours, you get hungry again, and then you start the process all over. Now, that is a normal, or should I say, that is a healthy blood sugar cycle. Now, as I said to you before, the majority of Americans don't have a healthy blood sugar cycle. The majority of Americans have some type of imbalance at some point in this cycle. So, most of us here in America, we will eat, and then the blood glucose levels rise. But as I said to you before, they rise much higher than what they should rise to. And this can be a result of a couple of different things. Number one, it could be a result of the type of food that someone is eating. So if you're eating refined food, that sugar is going smack dab into the bloodstream much faster than it should, because there's nothing to buffer it. There's no fiber, there's no healthy fats and things of that nature to slow down that process. That is why we have what's called the glycemic index. That shows you how quickly the sugar is entering into the bloodstream after the food has been consumed. So that's one reason why the blood glucose levels are going up extraordinarily high and very quickly. Another reason why the blood glucose levels may be increasing quickly and too high is because perhaps you don't have sufficient insulin being produced by the pancreas. Now, interestingly enough, that is usually not the case, even though a lot of providers will prescribe medication based on that presupposition that is faulty and that they've never tested, but the medication is based on that. And the reason why I'm saying that is very frequently I'll have someone come and talk to me and they'll say, "Oh, Michelle, I went to my doctor and he says that everything is okay. My blood glucose level is fine. My A1C is fine. Everything is okie dokie finoki." And then I'll say, really? Did your provider do a fasting insulin test? And 99 times out of 100, the provider has not done a fasting insulin test. And the reason why this is critical is because what is happening for the majority of people that look normal, meaning the A1C may look okay, so they may say, "Oh, well, my A1C is less than 5.7. But what they're not looking at is the fact that the body is producing a significant amount of insulin to get that A1C to be 5.7. And so what's happening is that you consume the food, the body's pumping out a significant amount of insulin, and so the blood glucose is going high, 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 but then the insulin is rushing out there and bringing now, the blood glucose is now going to start to crash down. And you're going on this roller coaster of highs and lows. And guess what? Your A1C is an averaging over to 3 months. So the average looks good, but no one is paying attention to these significant highs and lows, which are giving you a major red flag that something is going on. But in any case, the pancreas secretes the insulin. But then the other thing that happens, the reason why the insulin is going so high is not only because the blood glucose level is going high, but also because your body is developing, or your cells are developing, what we refer to as insulin resistance. Now let's do a little backpedaling here to explain what insulin is. Insulin, I used to explain this to people. Insulin is like my brother. You know, my brother could get me into any of the parties in town because all of the different guys, the bouncers, knew my brother. So if I wanted to get into a club, all I had to do was take my brother along with me. Now, the thing is that over time, if you abuse that relationship, then the bouncers start to look at you and they're like, "Nah, bruh, we're not going to let you in anymore because, you know, you keep bringing in all of this sugar and we can't handle all of this sugar." And so now the cell has to protect the inner mechanisms of itself. You can't have high levels of sugar within the cell, or else it's going to gunk up all the gears. It's going to throw off the mitochondria and produce just havoc inside the cell. So as a protective mechanism, the body becomes insulin resistant, or should I say the cells become insulin resistant. And when the cells become insulin resistant, now the glucose cannot go into the cells. And so now the glucose is hanging out in the bloodstream and the body says, man, we can't have that happening either. And so now the body says, well, since the sugar cannot get into the cells, we have got to get it out of the bloodstream because sugar in the bloodstream is significantly inflammatory. And so it says, we've got to save you from yourself. So now we're going to convert all of that sugar into fat. And guess where that's going to go? It's going to go around your abdominal area, creating that belly fat, that visceral fat that is surrounding your abdominal organs, including your liver. It's going to go into the liver to create a storage form of the sugar called glucagon. And so that is why we say when we're looking at belly fat is a major red flag that you have a significant imbalance in your blood glucose metabolism. Now, As I said, the body's always trying to protect you from yourself. So another thing that happens is that now the pancreas is starting to secrete more and more insulin. And over time, it's going to wear down the pancreas. And over time, you're going to get to a situation where the pancreas is not capable of producing the insulin any longer, leading into the need for exogenous insulin. But we're not going to go there right now. And as I said to you before, the excess sugar gets stored as fat, and excessive insulin starts to damage the blood vessels. And you have that roller coaster of high blood sugar and then crashing down. And so you get hungry and you're like, oh man, I got to eat again. And then the cycle just continues over and over again. So now let's look at some of the consequences of the insulin resistance. You have an impact on the thyroid and growth hormones, because the more you increase the production of insulin, the less growth hormones you produce. You also start to increase your risk of cancer. You start to increase your risk of high blood pressure, because remember what we said, that insulin is exceedingly inflammatory in the vessels. And so you start to create all of these tears in the vasculature. And what happens with that? Well, guess what? The body says, oh, we can't do that. Now we have to put a little salve in there, otherwise known as cholesterol. See, cholesterol is just your body's way of trying to save you from yourself. It's putting this salve on all of the tears that has been caused from the inflammatory factor of the insulin in the body. In addition to that, the blood starts to get thick because the cells, the red blood cells themselves, become caramelized with all of this extra sugar. And as the blood gets thicker and thicker and thicker, again, what happens is that your blood pressure increases in order to be able to move that thick, sludgy blood through the vessels. So you have a combination of the inflammation, creating the tears in the vasculature, creating the need for cholesterol to be tacked on there. It also creates the inflammation also creates the hardening of the arteries. That also increases the blood pressure. And then last but not least, the thickening of the blood increases the blood pressure. So these are a lot of different mechanisms that lead to increase in blood pressure and the injury of the blood cells and the sluggishness of the blood. Another byproduct of this is erectile dysfunction. So when I deal with our men, and even for our women, erectile dysfunction, where your sensitivity, your ability to engorge in the vaginal area becomes compromised because of the compromise to the blood vessels. And so what I say to our men especially is, don't simply take the purple pill or the blue pill or whatever the heck these pills are these days and say, oh, I'm going to force that blood into the erectile tissue. You better pay heed to the fact that your body is sending you a signal, a warning sign that you need to look at the health of your cardiovascular system. It also leads to systemic inflammation throughout the body, this high level of insulin. It also increases the risk of Alzheimer's. What many people are not aware of is that now they're referring to Alzheimer's as type 3 diabetes, insulin resistance within the brain. It also leads to low energy in the organs and the glands. Remember what we said. The sugar cannot get into the cell. So the irony is you have high blood sugar, but you don't have sufficient sugar getting into your cells, getting into your brain cells. That's why you're foggy, can't think clear. Getting into the cells of your body. That's why you're fatigued and tired, even though your blood sugar levels may be raging 200s, 300s, but your fuel is not getting into the cells themselves. And then, of course, at the end of the spectrum comes the label of diabetes. So now when we look at the causes of insulin resistance, some people will look at Mother Nature and say, oh, it's a genetic thing. But what I want us to realize here is that when we talk about genetics, it's not that something is wrong with the coding of our DNA. It's that the coding of our DNA acts as the canary in the coal mine. It acts as the warning signal, the smoke detectors in the house. So now instead of blaming the smoke detectors, like, oh my God, it's so annoying. There's something wrong with the damn smoke detectors. It keeps on beep, 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 beeping. No, there's nothing wrong with the smoke detectors beeping. In fact, you want it to beep. The problem is what's causing the smoke detector to beep. So remember what we were saying in terms of the blood glucose becoming elevated because now the sugar cannot get into the cells because of the insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is not a bad thing. Insulin resistance is there because you don't want to overload the cells with too much sugar. And so the body is protecting you and saying, we are going to say no at the door. We're going to resist the insulin because the insulin keeps on taking the sugar into the cells. So there's certain people that act as the alarm in the population. Their systems have been rigged at a certain threshold to raise the flag and say, hey guys, something is wrong here. We need to pay attention. We need to change something in our society. So some people are rigged with the alarm for being a smoke detector. And then you have other people that are rigged with, say, the carbon monoxide detector in the house. And then you have another person that's rigged with the humidity detector. So different people in our society have different detectors to warn the greater society when you have an issue. And instead of villainizing the alarm system, we need to be saying, glory, hallelujah, thank you to those people who have this specific genetic variation, because they are the ones that are giving us the warning flags. But that's just me talking, okay? The next thing that causes the insulin resistance is nutritional imbalances. So now another reason why the body becomes insulin resistant is because the stuff that you are trying to cram into the cell is not carrying the accompanying nutrients to help you to metabolize the glucose efficiently. One of the key nutrients that you need to properly metabolize your glucose are things like B1, things like chromium, things like zinc. But guess what? Most of our nutritional, well, I can't even call it nutrition, Lord, child, please. Most of the stuff that we consume today are completely devoid of these key nutrients that the body needs to be able to properly metabolize glucose. Now, some of you may remember way back in junior high school, you learned about the Krebs cycle, right? About how the body will take C6H12O6, otherwise known as glucose, and convert it into ATP. What a lot of people don't realize is that in order for it to turn the sugar into energy, you have to have these cofactors, otherwise known as vitamins and minerals. If you don't, then everything shuts down. So when the body doesn't have the cofactors that it needs to convert the glucose into energy, the body becomes insulin resistant because it says, you know what? I can't handle this stuff. I don't have the cofactors that I need to burn it off as energy. So it's best that I don't even let this stuff into the cell, or else it's going to truly clog up the machinery. Other things that cause insulin resistance include stress. Now, I have to tell you, This is the one that most people have difficulty wrapping their minds around. Most people have no clue that stress is one of the major reasons why they have all of that abdominal fat. Now, I have to make a confession to you guys. This is my cross to bear, or should I say, this is my challenge, because I'm not really one for eating a whole lot of junk and all that kind of stuff. And it took a long time for me to realize that where my challenge came from in terms of my blood glucose metabolism and insulin resistance and things of that nature was not from the food that I was consuming, but from the stress that I was not transforming. So stress creates an increase in cortisol levels. And cortisol levels, oh my gosh, they wreak havoc on your blood glucose balance. When your body is in the stress zone, when your cortisol levels are high, number one, the inflammation starts to rage in your body, then your insulin levels start to go off track. But the most important thing is that your body says, you know what? We better prepare for some real stuff to be going down. And how does the body prepare for the possibility of major issues? It says we've got to store our energy source, otherwise known as our fat. And so that's what happens with a lot of people who are dealing with a lot of stress. It starts to build up their fat reserves in terms of abdominal fat. And so what I tell people is beware of the stress pot. That stress pot that builds up around the abdomen, that visceral fat. And then other things that lead to insulin resistance are things like lack of exercise, because when you don't exercise, you're not building and maintaining muscle. And if you're not building and maintaining muscle, you're not creating one of the primary ways that your body utilizes the sugar, the glucose in the body. And then the next one is sleep. Again, this is a sneaky one that most people do not take into consideration. When you do not sleep, this creates a situation where you are likely to have much more elevated levels of blood glucose in the subsequent morning and the day. So your body utilizes your sleep to reset everything and to bring down the stress point. When you are not sleeping adequately, it's like your body never went through the restoration period that it needs. And it's just going and going and going and going. I've had a lot of people that I've worked with where they're doing phenomenal with their exercise. They're doing phenomenal with their food consumption. I mean, amazing. And then they'll say, but Michelle, I don't understand. Why is my blood sugar levels still so high, especially in the morning? And again, it took a while for me to make this connection. But when I finally started to look at people's sleeping records and started to make that connection that when you don't have proper sleep, your blood glucose levels start to go higher and higher and stay high. All right. So now let's look at some of the symptoms of insulin resistance, because remember what I said, that a lot of people are completely clueless that they are building up insulin resistance. And even their doctors are clueless about this because they say, oh, your blood glucose level is fine, meaning your fasting blood glucose level is fine. And even if it is within what we call the optimal range, because I've seen this, where people have fasting blood glucose levels of 85, 90, which that in itself is extremely much better than what ordinary medical practitioners are looking for. So normal practitioners out there say, oh, well, as long as it's 100 or less, then it's fine. But what we're coming to understand is that even 100 is relatively high for a fasting blood glucose level. But anyway, what we're seeing here is that we need to have an understanding of what are the symptoms of insulin resistance, because insulin resistance happens long before your body's blood glucose levels become discernible as being disrupted. Remember, your body's always going to rob from Peter to pay Paul. It's always going to do everything possible to keep your blood sugar levels in optimal range. And while it's doing this, a lot of other stuff is going off the range. So some symptoms of insulin resistance include things like we talked about before, the belly fat, low energy, especially after meals, which you think is ironic because you think after you eat a meal, heck, you just put a lot of energy into the system, so you should be full of energy, right? No. Remember what we said with that insulin resistance, right? Because of the insulin resistance, the energy, the glucose is not getting into the cells, and it's just hanging out in the bloodstream until it gets converted into the storage form to go into the liver or to create that visceral fat. And then another symptom of insulin resistance is that you feel hungry even after a full meal. Why? Because the body is not getting the energy that it needs. And so it's starting to communicate to you, hey, I'm still hungry, I'm still hungry, I'm still hungry. And you're like, but I just ate. Yeah, you may have just eaten, but guess what? That energy is not getting into the cells. And then you have the mid-afternoon energy slump. Or some of you are probably familiar with the food coma, especially during the holidays. You had all of that rich food, the pies, the sauces, the gravies, and all of that stuff. And guess what? Everybody went comatose after Thanksgiving dinner, right? Everybody went comatose after Christmas dinner. Insulin resistance, baby. You may have difficulty focusing. Remember, we talked about that type 3 diabetes, where you get insulin resistance in the brain. Where, remember, one of the most highly consumptive organs in the body when it comes to sugar is actually your brain. Your brain uses more sugar than any other part of your body. But what happens if you're developing insulin resistance? Then guess what? The sugar is not able to get into the brain cells. And so now everything's just foggy. Can't remember stuff. Things just seem unclear. You can't think straight. And then last but not least, you get hangries, right? That up and down of your mood. You get cranky, irritable. Some people you get depressed. You get even anxious. That roller coaster of up and downs of your emotions. Look for this especially in children. We talk about quote unquote ADD, ADHD children. No, do not buy into that label. Start to become curious and ask yourself, why is this child exhibiting these types of symptoms? And there are a lot of different reasons for that. So now we're going to look at this as a spectrum, not just waiting for that diagnosis of diabetes, but looking at things from a spectrum. First, we start out with the hyperinsulinemia, meaning the high levels of that insulin, remember? And then we talk about reactive hypoglycemia, that up and down of the blood sugar. So the blood sugar goes high, and then we pump out all of that insulin, and then it comes crashing down. That's what we refer to as reactive hypoglycemia. And then that leads into insulin resistance, and that leads into metabolic syndrome, where now you're tapping into not only an imbalance in the blood glucose, but also it's going to start to affect other aspects your cholesterol levels, your cardiovascular health, everything. And then diabetes. So notice, diabetes is like at the end of the spectrum. So many things have fallen through the cracks long before that final diagnosis of diabetes. So we've talked about how insulin triggers belly fat. We've talked about the connection with brain fog. We've talked about the feeling of burnout, feeling of fatigue and decreased energy, and how all of these things are correlated. So there are 5 key steps to restore balance. Number 1, we want to increase insulin sensitivity. We want to decrease insulin need. We want to reduce inflammation. We want to optimize our fat burning and our lean mass building. And we want to minimize the impact of candy bar eating effects of stress. So now what do we do? To reverse insulin resistance, we have to look at 5 key areas. Number 1, movement. Number 2, nutrition. Number 3, stress. 4, sleep. And another one that slips by many people, the timing, the issue of timing. So first, let's talk about movement. Do you know that there's a difference between the quality of movement versus the quantity of movement? And a lot of people think that they have to do this Jane Fonda workout for like 45 minutes to an hour every day. And ironically, as they are running on the treadmill, they're actually increasing the insulin resistance because they're increasing the stress in the body, the stress perception in the body. So, one of the things that we are going to talk about as we go through the 90 days is integrating short bursts of fitness. And you can look this up. You can go into YouTube, and it's called HIT, high intensity interval training, where it's not about these long periods of training, but rather short bursts of training. And then we also have things like Japanese walking. We also have things like shiver size. All of these are different ways of exercising that will optimize fat burning versus carbohydrate or sugar burning. And it will also increase the production of growth hormone in the body and reduce the production of the stress hormone, aka cortisol. The other thing is that you want to access foods that trigger fat burning, that optimize fat burning, that will help to rev up your system. And remember what we talked about. We said that, ironically, one of the things that people don't understand when they think about food and increasing their energy is that it's not about the macronutrients. It's not about the carbohydrates and the proteins. It's actually about the micronutrients, the vitamins and the minerals that are essential to having the catalytic productions in the fat burning cycle, as well as the Krebs cycle, the carbohydrate burning cycle. So if you don't have these key nutrients, you're not going to be able to rev up the engines, the metabolic engines in the body. So we want to focus on these foods that are rich in the nutrients that are missing from our general diet so that we can optimize our fat burning. And we also want to look at activities that help us to melt the fat away. And the way that you melt the fat away is by looking at different things that you can do to transform stress in your life. What I tell people every time is life is always lifing, okay? There's only so much control that we have over the various stressors in our lives. And in fact, trying to control the stressors in our lives only leads to even more stress in your life and the illusion of control. So instead of trying to control everyone and everything in your life, what we focus on is learning how to adapt our responses to the stressors in our lives, our responses to the interesting people in our lives, our responses to the interesting thoughts that come through our minds, our response to the interesting events that occur in our life. And restoring that balance will help to repair our stress response, our sympathetic, parasympathetic balance in our bodies over time. Then we look at the hormone harmony. Remember, dysregulation of our hormones lead to flabby, foggy, and fatigue. It is important that we look at ways to optimize a good night's sleep. And that will look different for different people. Some people, they can optimize their sleep by simply creating a nighttime routine. Some people, they can optimize their sleep by integrating different minerals such as magnesium. Some people, they can optimize their sleep by engaging in certain activities, certain stress transformation activities, such as journaling, such as yoga, things of that nature. And so we want to help you to really hone in on what are some of the activities that you can do to optimize your hormonal harmony so that you can burn fat while you sleep and balance your stress hormones. Then we have to look at shaping ourselves by the clock. It's not just a matter of what you eat, so much as it is a matter of when you eat. Again, it's not simply a matter of what you eat, but a matter of when you eat. We live in a really particular, interesting time where people are constantly eating. Our bodies were not designed to be constantly eating. If we would simply reverse our trajectory and go back to the timing of, say, 2 generations ago, a lot of the issues that we're dealing with today would not be present. Most people have the foggiest notion of what it means to fast for more than 8 hours because they're constantly stuffing something into their face. And in fact, medical providers have further exacerbated this misunderstanding by talking about, oh, you need to have a lot of frequent small meals when you have blood sugar dysregulation. No, that is like one of the worst things to do. Why? Because now you're constantly producing and pumping out insulin, which is going to further exacerbate the problem. Not only that, you're failing to understand that one of the main ways that the body helps to reset itself is by having a cleansing period, timeout period, where it doesn't have to spend significant amount of its energy trying to consume and break down food and release waste matter. So we're going to talk about the importance of things like intermittent fasting, and not only intermittent fasting, where you're fasting for, say, a period of 12 to 15 hours overnight, but we're also going to talk about the benefits of prolonged fasting. Fasting for what happens when you fast for 24 hours? What happens when you fast for 36 hours? What happens when you fast for 48 hours, 72 hours? And for some of you, you're like, oh my God, Michelle, I can't do that. I know. You think that is like way beyond you. But slowly but surely, we're going to retrain the system to go back to the natural design, the natural divine design And part of that natural divine design is number one, intermittent fasting, fasting overnight. And number two, having occasional fasting to help to clear and reset the body. When you look at every spiritual tradition, when you look at the various significant cultural traditions around the world, there is embedded in all of these the concept of fasting and an understanding of the power, the healing, restorative power of fasting. And part of what it does is that it helps the body to clear out debris, to clear out waste matter, to clear out certain cells that are not optimal, that do not serve the whole. So, what we're talking about is inviting you to join us for what we refer to as the 90-day Heal Thyself Reset. And we're going to talk about utilizing certain tools like blood glucose meters or ketone meters. And we're going to help you to get access to these meters. We can even help you to get access to what's called a continuous glucose meter. For those of you who are like, oh, heck to the no, I am not pricking my finger every 5 seconds. So you could get a continuous glucose meter. We can help you to get that. And to show you how to optimize your meal plans with nutrients that restore insulin sensitivity, with herbs that restore insulin sensitivity, with essential oils that restore insulin sensitivity. We're going to be sharing with you different walking activities, burst activities, resistance training activities to help you to burn fat and to increase muscle. We're going to show you how to create meal plans that are nutrient dense and anti-inflammatory with alkalizing foods that will not require you to produce so much insulin. And we're going to help you to reset your system, reset your circadian rhythm, reset yourself to be in harmony with the divine design, and to engage in stress transforming activities throughout the day. So, part of what you want to do is eat lots of greens and non-starchy vegetables, avoiding trans fats, avoided heated fats, avoiding seed oils, increase your DHA in your omega-3 fatty acids, decrease your omega-6s, those seed oils that we were talking about, avoiding sugar and processed foods, eating low glycemic foods, improving your minerals such as chromium, zinc, magnesium, improving your B vitamins, and avoiding foods that raise your blood sugar above 110 or more than 25 points. You also want to look at removing possible allergens and potential food sensitivities, such as gluten, dairy, soy, corn, eggs, and peanuts. And other things that some people have food sensitivities to include things like shellfish, tree nuts, strawberries, citrus, oats, and yeast. And to have an understanding of the difference between a food sensitivity and a food allergen. Now, other things that will help you to improve your insulin balance are not eating after dinner, eating only 3 meals a day, where you're allowing 4 to 6 hours between meals, so no snacking. Another wonderful sales point of the quote unquote food industry, that they have now made us believe that we have to snack and that our children have to snack. The biggest lie ever sold to us. Also, you want to make sure that you eat to where you are satiated, where you're full, where you're not overeating, at the same time, not undereating. See, this is another one that a lot of times people don't understand. When you don't eat sufficiently, you're putting your body into the stress zone where it's like, oh my God, I don't know if she's going to feed me anymore. So now I've got to save everything, conserve everything, because I am going into the possibility of starvation mode. So that is why a lot of people who say to me, oh, but Michelle, I eat very little. And then they're surprised when I say, you need to eat more. I have a young woman right now that I'm working with. She's actually nursing. And I was looking at her food journals. I was like, aren't you hungry? Because I was like, man, there's no way that this woman could be satiated. And she's like, yeah, but I don't know if I should eat more food. I was like, you need to eat more food. I mean, come on, sweetie, you are breastfeeding. But even if you're not breastfeeding, you need to have sufficient fuel coming into the body so that your body does not perceive starvation mode and start to work from that premise and therefore hold on to everything and lower your metabolic threshold. Also, eating slowly and calmly. You remember we were taught to say grace before our meals? And even if you are not a religious person, shift and just say, you know what? I'm going to be thankful before my meals. I'm going to take a time to just calm myself. Never eat when you are in a state of agitation. Never eat when you are in a state of irritation. Always seek to be calm when you're eating and to be joyful when you're eating, to be in a state of appreciation when you're eating, so that you will optimize your food. What I tell people is that you can have the most organic, pristine foods, but if you are putting it into a toxic environment where when you're embroiled in anger and you're embroiled in these depleting emotions, then you're actually going to convert that food into a toxin. Also, practice, as I said, breathing and appreciation before each meal. And consider if you're going to eat breakfast, then make that breakfast that is containing a high amount of proteins and very low, if any, carbohydrates. Now, I want you to also think about what I've said to you in terms of fasting, to embrace fasting for health and longevity. And it's not one of those gimmicky things, really and truly. The way I teach fasting is that we embrace it as a part of our lives, embrace it as a way of bringing balance to our life. We are so overstimulated in our world. And when I say fasting, I'm not just simply talking about fasting from foods or drinks. I'm talking about fasting from social media, fasting from negative people, fasting from the thoughts that we tend to harbor and fester within ourselves, fasting from emotions that deplete us, fasting from activities that we engage in just to be busy. Many people find this the most challenging part of the process, to go into a zone where you're fasting, when you're allowing the body, the mind, the heart, spirit to just take a break and to do no thing. This, you cannot replace this with any kind of pill, or any kind of elixir, any kind of potion, you know. And now I'm even hearing people, they're talking about different fasting programs where they're like, oh well, you can eat X amount of calories. It's fast. That's like a modified meal program, but it's not a fast. You're missing one of the key components of what fasting is. Fasting is tapping into the nothingness that allows the body, the mind, the spirit to create health and well-being from the nothingness, where you are under the realization that true health and restorative being comes from within. And when you allow yourself to completely erase or remove all of these other distractions, that is when that restorative power that comes from the divine becomes activated. Ah, I cannot begin to tell you the beauty that you tap into when you allow yourself to embrace fasting physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Now, that being said, it's not something that you just jump into. It's something that you have to prepare for physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually in order to make it a um, beneficial and productive experience. So now some of the real world impacts from fasting are things like weight loss, things like reduction in blood pressure points, things like reversal of major disease risks, and improve mental clarity, as well as optimizing brain function. And foods that flatten the body, clear away the fog and the fatigue, are more so a matter of avoidance than anything. So avoiding sugar and all its relatives like maple syrup, agave, honey, rice syrup, sweeteners, including the artificial ones, because the artificial ones still trigger insulin even though they're not elevating the blood sugar levels, because it's sending that message to the brain that there's sugar that needs to be processed. Avoiding flour products and gluten products, the pastas, the breads, the crackers, even the whole grain kinds, and avoiding processed hydrogenated oils and heated fats, the margarine, the mayonnaise, the polyunsaturated oils, the seed oils. And if you have to cook with some oil, utilize things like olive oil. And we're talking about cold pressed virgin olive oil and coconut oil at low temperatures. But ideally, you don't even need to utilize oil, really and truly. And then increase your intake of dark green leafy vegetables, your spinach, your kale, your collards, your red lettuces, and things of that nature. Also, your brassicas, your broccoli, your cabbages, your cauliflowers, and avocado helps to reset your insulin sensitivity. Chia seeds also helps to provide you with a phenomenal source of omega-3 fatty acids, proteins, and minerals that help to balance blood sugar levels. And herbs and spices like cinnamon and cardamom and coriander and ginger. Phenomenal, phenomenal. Some supplements that help are things like chromium, magnesium citrate, glycinate, DHA, and vanadilyl sulfate. So these are some supplements that can help to optimize your body's insulin production and or utilization sensitivity. So now the question becomes, where do you go here from here? We would like to invite you to become proactive, to initiate a change, and to work with us in a community with what we refer to as the 90-day reset. And the 90-day reset, you get access to our private community, access to our online learning center where you will have lifelong access to certain courses that are incorporated in this program, as weekly mentorship sessions, what we call our ABC sessions, which is assess, build, cleanse. Also, our Fun Food Fridays and our meditation sessions. We also have a monthly cleansing challenge where we will help you to cleanse once 1 week per month. And during that cleanse, we're going to help you to build up to fasting for longer and longer periods of time. Initially, we start out with helping you to engage in intermittent fasting. If you've already mastered intermittent fasting, then we encourage you to go into a 24-hour fast. If you've already mastered a 24-hour fast, then we go into a 36 to 48-hour fast, and then into a 72-hour fast. So wherever you are, we are willing to meet you and to take you to the next level. We also give you access to our 24/7 resource platform that includes recipes and shopping lists and meal plans, as well as exercises. Remember, I talked about the high intensity interval training exercises and yoga and stress transformation activities and things of that nature. In addition to that, you're able to track different metrics, whether it be tracking your bowel movements. Yes, bowel movements are very key. Tracking your water consumption, tracking your activity levels, tracking your blood glucose levels, because you can also sync it with your various devices, whether it be your Apple Watch or your Fitbit or whatever it is, you can sync it. And the best part of it is that you get 24/7 2-hour messaging where you're able to communicate with myself and our health stewards that will help you in the journey, as well as exclusive discounts to labs and supplements and devices. So we're going to talk to you about labs. And when you do those labs, you can bring them to our weekly sessions to get insight into what your numbers mean, how you can improve your numbers, what are other things to consider. So we not only do we give you access to the labs, but we also give you access to um, discounts on supplements and special access to different devices. Like, remember, I told you about the continuous glucose meter, which ordinarily you would have to get a prescription for, but we are able to give you access to those types of devices. Also, devices that help you to track your ketones, your blood glucose levels, stress, biofeedback devices, lots of different devices. And for me, the best part of why I'm doing this, I've got to be up um transparent with you guys. We are doing this to raise funds for our Roots and Resilience Healing Sanctuary for our military women and children that are experiencing trauma and housing instability. Many people are unaware of the reality that a lot of our military women are homeless, and they're homeless with their children. And so your gift to us allows us to give to them as we give to you. So I am blessed and honored and privileged to be able to serve you and to act as a vessel for us to raise the money for our funds, for the sanctuary, for the Roots and Resilience Sanctuary. So in order to participate in this program, we ask that you donate to It Takes a Village Ministry, a 501c3 organization, a love offering of $297. That $297 will enable you to participate in this community for this 90-day reset. And as I said, it will help you to help us to help them. So that's where I'm going to end it for you guys. Thank you so very much for joining us tonight. And we're going to open it up to questions. Any questions? Oh, come on, guys. I know somebody has to have some kind of question.